last week. Any observations or comments? Okay. All right. So let's start again. We know our focus area is on the data professional. So it's these guys over here, the lives that they live, and then almost how they have to interact with all of the other people within the business. So we're focusing on the data professional. These are the archetypes that we've spoken about. And this was the top 3 data pains that we got right up front when we initiated the engagement with the data professionals in terms of trying to say, what are you guys battling with? And we did the first one where we did vision, and then we moved into skills. That was last week, pretty much around the skills. And then, so I was sitting almost this morning and the day before trying to say, well, which ones do we tackle? And I thought this could be quite interesting, talking politics, control, behavior with a bunch of data management professionals, in terms of some of you may even turn around and say, what has this got to do with me? Or how do I get involved with this? And it then struck me, we are preparing a course for executives, and it's mainly focusing at what we refer to as the tier 2 executives. And we're trying to get to a point where we can engage with them and convince them that taking on this data journey is critical. It's really important to their businesses. We have to, and when we prepare for executives, you don't have like this whole day training session where you can say, okay, what is data management? And we present the demo wheel and we start walking around the wheel. It's not going to be long before they're making excuses, having to go and find somewhere else on their phone. So you're not going to get far if you try to throw a whole lot of knowledge at them and you haven't addressed the awareness or the desire. Now, I'm sure a few of you may know something about change control. And there's that ProSci thing that talks about ADCAR. That's the acronym that they use. So they keep on telling you guys, don't try to impart knowledge when you can't convince awareness and desire. So I thought, and then I'm thinking about this, I thought probably this is where we get into the politics, we get to the behavioral issues, we get to the control issues, because we haven't made people aware and we haven't created that desire. Now, so today's thing is quite interesting, because I was also challenged by somebody else to say, if you go into this meeting, do you go into the meeting knowing what they're going to tell you when you start saying, why are you resistant to data? Why are you not using data? Do you have could you list the top 4 issues that they would come back at you with, in terms of saying, but these are our problems and these are our challenges. So I actually took quite some time to think about that, and I have spent some time and I've done some reading, and I thought this would be quite interesting, putting you guys in a similar position. So please remember that you're talking to executives, you're talking to people that are not data management professionals. So it's not helpful to say, but we don't have completeness, or we don't have this or that. That's not the issue. We're now having to communicate upwards at a board level and try to communicate with them and try. So I put you guys in this bracket, and so if you wouldn't mind giving me what you believe the top 4 data problems for the business, and so if you're preparing this presentation, we would then go, once we've heard these problems, we would then start to talk and help them address their problems. So please don't get to relational, dimensional, and all that type of things. That's not where we're at. We're here talking to business, and we're sort of trying to preempt the challenges that they're going to throw at us, and then have to convince them on what can be done and what we should be doing. So if you guys wouldn't mind just typing in what you believe your top 4 data problems are that business people can understand. with all your
From,
experience. Yes, Nikki.
sorry, from those 4 that you've put there.
Are they still there? I was hoping that they weren't there.
Oh no, they are, but I'm already off on a tangent, so that's why I was asking.
Oh, are they? Oh, shucks. Okay, that wasn't supposed to work like that.
Okay.
Okay, so, but what would you think? I mean, so that's
Okay, that's
sort
fine.
of what,
Thank you.
okay. Okay, so I think most of you guys have got some level of response there. And what I am finding interesting with this challenge is, remember and I'm not sure whether I showed you the last time where when we put together a data strategy, one of the things that we have to do as people that are leading the data management within an organization is start to show value very quickly. And some of the analytical stuff and getting the right platforms down and stuff like that, those can take time. And so we have to get the value coming through quickly. So I like to break it up in terms of an immediate or / an urgent data strategy. So what would I expect to see within a data strategy for most urgent data strategies for most businesses? I think as you progress further down, it's going to be more business oriented and having that understanding. So the things that I like to, or I expecting to see, and doing some review with different people, and certainly from a data governance point of view. So if I put my strategy down, these are the type of things. 50% of the time, people are trying to improve the value that they get and the usage of the information. Okay. Then there's 25% of the importance is trust and transparency. 15% is related to visibility. Where can I find the data? What data do we have? That helps with hoarding of information. And then we have that 10% of the challenges that we have to face would be avoidance of risk. Okay, so this is some of the summaries that people have done across all the different companies in terms of the data strategies and what the focus is from a data governance point of view. And what should we be looking at? So what would be the correct things that make a difference to the business? So it was nice to see in terms of when we came through here, quality is always an issue, availability and trust. So the thing I liked about this is these are the things that we understand. It's increased usage in assets, quality, lineage, and protection. Whereas the business or the executives would see, well, what value have I got in the information and the use of information? What is my trust and transparency of the data? What is the visibility and what's the avoidance of risk? So those are the things that the business people will relate to. And if we look at your comments, transparency, trust, availability, quality, timeframes, there's project issues and reputational risk and I'm not sure if I fully understand that. It's not my project timeframes or lack thereof don't understand the reputational impact. So is that probably building data repositories or reporting and we're not sure of what the impact is of delivering bad data? I'm assuming that's the...
Yeah. So basically, well, somebody took on something and they're handing it back. If anything actually had to go wrong, there would be a massive reputational damage.
Right.
But we don't want to actually get into the good processes and governance of the sign-off and understanding all of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so what we do find is that the time allocated to achieve those wins and things are not always, they don't always understand the amount of engineering that needs to go on, if that's a good summary of what you said.
Correct. Or there's too much politics around it and then they're like, don't worry about it. It will be okay. Just just get the sign off.
Right. Okay. And so, can business find information easily? And then the consequence of that, if they can't find it, they tend to hoard the data. Accuracy, timeliness, lack of meaning of data, and then frequency. Accessing the information real time. So, if we were to try to lift ourselves and then how do we communicate to the business, we're basically going to say our focus should be on the value, the usage of the assets. Are we using them appropriately? We've got a massive set of data that's running around, but what value are we getting out of that? And that would certainly be, you'd certainly be able to look at the analytics and the use of data to make decisions. And you say, guys, we're just not using your data to back up that insight that you require. And the next one would be a lack of trust and transparency. So we would then have to go, and there again, it's probably what you want to do is, to an extent, is focus at the reporting level and get that trust and transparency back up and running. So you're talking maybe 100 days, you look at 2-3 months where you got to recreate this. You can't re-engineer all the different elements, but you've got to get some trust back again. So we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of how do we establish it. Just developing a data catalog. That's also fantastic for business when they know that they aren't able to access these assets to make decisions. They think that someone's around there, but then being able to have that ready available where people can see where that data catalog is. And I think it was on Monday, we did a presentation on the European data platform, and they actually were able to put that platform together in a record time. They are now across 36 countries, and they have 1 million data sets. And they've got quality measurements on every single data set. They got tags, they've got different subject area, business subject area, where they allow people to drill down. And they're working across all the governments. So sometimes we think we've got big problems because we're working with big organizations, but just imagine what something like that takes to put together. I think our problems sort of drift down quite tremendously. And then we've got protection, avoidance of risk. I don't know how many of you guys have been following the challenge with Experian. I'd be quite interested, we'll chat a little bit about that later on. So there is something that the execs must be getting terrified of. I think of the CEO having to stand up and answer to it. We've been involved with Experience on some of the scenarios, and I've got the COO responding to my emails. And it's like, just imagine the pain that those guys are feeling at this point in time. And we must know that any company that has a breach like that, it's the top people are going to be involved in answering all these questions. So this pain and this risk must be quite high for them. Okay. So this question that I have over here, what I wanted to ask you was, what are the type of things that you would do to enable, so you know the CDO, or you're part of his team, you may be the data architect, you're part of the team, and you're having to suggest a way in which we increase the data usage. Now, we sort of saying this needs to happen pretty quickly, right? So if we're wanting to open wallets, we're wanting people to spend on data management and continue to spend, we've got to get something going pretty quickly, all right? So what would your recommendations be to improve data asset usage? Remember, we're talking to execs now, so first of all, they realize, shucks, we're hardly using our data, we're not making the right decisions. So what sort of suggestions would you make?
Also, Howard, maybe from our side, I think the main drive for us, as you mentioned, everything comes down to value. So if we don't speak that language, obviously they sort of zone out. So whatever we bring in from that discussion to say, using data as an asset always needs to tie back to initiative. So simple things, for instance, like home deliveries, because we don't get addresses right, those type of things, we sort of missed the mark and then increased costs. So from that perspective, there's a direct link between increasing the value of the data, or the trust or the quality of it, as well as directly tying back to business value, and having that. So the discussion is almost always, whatever we're using as an asset. So our discussion typically is, if we have vehicles or a building, that's an asset. The way we look after it, maintain it, that sort of drives our business value. Data for us is exactly the same thing. So we don't fix all the data. We don't look at all the quality. We look at the ones specifically tying back to the main the business strategy or strategic goals, and target those ones, because that's sort of the low-hanging fruit. And from that perspective, once you have that discussion with them, they tie into it. So they listen and they attend. So from a data asset usage perspective, to get their buy-in, always link it back to value, make it relevant, and make sure it ties back to the strategic objectives.
So if you could, I like what you're saying. And so remember, we've got these 4 areas, and I'm now sort of drilling down into each one of these areas. Quality we'll get to next. And now you bring about an important point. And so what I'm asking in this section is, try not to mention quality, because we're going to deal with it. So for example, if our GPS locations are wrong, then we're not going to be able to deliver. But I liked your second part of that, is that if I can tie it back to value, and as we know, the business, they should have, to an extent, what their documented value is, and you need to talk would be on their value chain to their different stakeholders. So now you've got to be saying, okay, what's your value chain, and how do I contribute to that?
Yeah.
So what would some of the approaches that you would use? Yes, Harrison.
Hello. Sorry, my
No
mute
problem.
button was not going off. I'm just to retaliate on what as I said. So we're looking at tying back to the strategies, the business overall strategy, and the data strategy itself, and then trying to find what interests the business itself, the execs. Because every one of the execs definitely comes in with their own strategy for their function. We might say it like that. But now, as business overall, we are looking at the competitive advantage of how data is going to push them further than the competition. So it ties back to the value. And you know, when you're talking to the execs, that's what they would want to hear.
Right. So, you know, that would be one of their concerns, but I suppose I'm trying to give you a context here in terms of you've got 100 days, okay? Now, trying to create competitive value within 100 days, and I suppose maybe I didn't do a good job in the beginning. When we build these data strategies, we will typically be careful of saying we want to hit your final target data strategy, because target will never exist. We'll keep on going and redefining target. So we try to create these immediate / urgent data strategies, and what I call a 3-in-1 strategy. Give me what your urgent is, then give me the intermediate, and then I'll deal with the target. When I say give me, I'm suggesting this is what we should focus on. Urgent must demonstrate value of your massive data management office that you want to bring in and the cost that you want to bring in, and so you've got to open the wallet. If you can't open the wallet within that period, well, you're going to be battling to open it all the way down the road. So to an extent, I'm sort of painting you in a corner here to say, guys, you don't have a lot of time to demonstrate this. You can't go and check out every single competitor, bring them new data, and then give them the edge. What do we do with our existing assets? What do we do with our existing data to make a change in the company that you're not going to spend buckets full of money and platforms and stuff like that? You've got a whole lot of data that you're sitting on.
So, well, I think, sorry, I'll jump in again here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking automation, automation in most of the, maybe the reporting
Okay.
structures. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the type of thing. That's the type of thing you want to do. Yeah. So that's one of it. So certainly put it down.
Howard, would you
Yes.
look at, for instance, look at your product range, for instance, and say, right, what portion of the revenue are we generating from what portion of the product catalog, and use the data to streamline your effort, or streamline your marketing, or streamline your, or even use the data to sunset certain products because it's not returning the value for the effort versus the effort.
Sure.
So is that what you mean by, like, you can harness the data that you already have, transactional data, to see, okay, this is our success range versus this one, this is not really successful. However, these bits of product support the successful product range, you know, that kind of.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is the scenario. What you always got to be careful of is you're in a room full of execs, you don't really understand their business, whatever it is. And so you're trying to talk at a more, how does one say, executive level. As soon as you delve into the detail, you're gonna start maybe excluding some of them. So I mean, you are right. You can certainly do those type of things, and you may go and look around for what people call quick wins or low hanging fruit, or people are trying to get away from that. Maybe it's just the appropriate business cases or use cases that are going to deliver value.
So would an executive be interested in, the beers and nappies use case?
Probably not.
Okay, is that the level? Okay.
Yeah, probably not, because you're trying to encourage them to say, what can I appeal? How do I appeal to them to take on a new stance, take on a new approach to using their data, and now specifically from an asset point of view, how do I turn the lights on for them? And I think Zane mentioned it at a high level to say, guys, I've got to talk value to them. I've got to make sure that the data communicates, that we use the data for value.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we may have spent quite a bit of time, and maybe I haven't explained it properly, but what Zane was right there is you have to say to them an understanding of saying, guys, you have to produce value to your stakeholders. Whatever your stakeholders are, wherever they are, you've got to deliver value. Now, whatever we can do to focus the data in helping you deliver that value quicker, better, cheaper, automated, whatever it is, that's how we got to help make use of our data assets. But I liked what Zane said, is even before getting into using the term data asset, you've got to be able to explain to them that your data can do this for you. Your data can become an asset. So it's not just your fixed assets and your cash and your liquid assets and things like that. You've got to be able to convince them that we can use data to deliver value to their stakeholders that they have to deliver to on a much quicker basis and a better than what they're currently doing. So there were some fascinating comments by different people as they say to us that data management or data governance, what they do is, because they're getting scared of things like privacy and stuff like that, they tend to throttle the data. So instead of democratizing data, they try to prevent all the data from coming in, and then they also try to prevent the data from being used by people. And so the net effect, when people look at this data management and say, well, now I can't access it, I can't get value out of it, and that's the negative view they have of the way in which certain data management projects are doing, because their focus is on privacy and compliance, and then that's what they get that outcome, and they don't get the outcome of value to the stakeholders. They get, oh, well, we've done everything to tighten this up, and now no one can move. So we're all in a straitjacket. So, and I think people are starting to see that and starting to get frustrated. Rather than opening the data up, we're closing the data down. Okay. Zane, does that talk to the point that you raised?
Yeah, no, that's definitely, and I think the challenge that we sort of see is sort of the tail end of it. Because of fear, we sort of get that, pop-ups of shadow BI, shadow analytics, and things that also sort of come off the tail end of it. And then people literally keep your data hostage, which is where the challenges start.
Yeah, so there's been some interesting discussions that we're having to transform the use of that term shadow BI and things like that, where we almost talking about business-led BI. So we're trying to say, okay, we're going to get the data to you as quickly as possible. We're going to get it. We're going to focus on the quality. We're going to deliver it. You can understand what it means. But then the actual insight, the derivation of insight, may be faster and quicker at the business level rather than at a centralized level. So let's encourage that ability to derive insights from the business, by the business, and not always say, oh, shucks, we've got all these shadow people running around, and maybe we've got to find a middle road and not label that always from a negative point of view. There can be a positive approach to that way of deriving the insights faster.
Yep.
Okay, but focus your assets on a data value chain that supports the business value chain. So if I look at my value chain that's going horizontally between the different departments, you've got to unlock it. So you can't tighten the screws down and then nothing moves and you get silos again. So you've got to allow the data to move between the different areas. But of course, it's got to come up with the appropriate level of controls and scenarios like that. But you've got to say, here is the data. This data can add value to that data, and we can finally get to the stakeholder that needs the value. And what I find when I look at some of the business architecture or the value chains is they don't actually know exactly how they're going to deliver value to the stakeholder and how they measure it. And if we ask them where are their blockages, it's like, I'm not really sure. And I'm not sure why I'm getting blocked. I just know that I'm not getting, the customers are leaving, then we're not getting to the end, and you're not measuring that. And if you can just give them the insight on some of the challenges they're facing using the data, all of a sudden they say, okay, now I'm getting value out of this. I can see what's going on with my business. Otherwise, we're running blind. Harrison, is there any comments from your side or anybody else? Hiten, I see you there as well. And Andrea, how are you guys convincing your execs?
So Howard, let me give you my experience. Hello?
Yes, are you breaking up, Hiten?
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. So let me give you my experience. Couple of meetings back, we had a scenario where we had actually presented some data to the senior executives, which are basically our directors, and unfortunately, the senior managers had a different view of the data that we had actually presented, and unfortunately, we are actually facing a very serious challenge when it actually comes to presentation of data. So I'm not too sure whether it's under the right context or not, but it's a very big challenge that we have, especially in Syria.
Sure, Hiten, I picked up some of what you were saying. I don't know, Paul, did you hear that? Is anyone else here Hiten a little bit better than me?
No, sorry. Also,
I think my reception is not very clear, unfortunately.
Right, but it seems like did you say you presented your data to the executives, and then you mentioned something about some of the business managers or the other levels? There was some problem there. Was that in predictive? I think you also mentioned predictive.
Yes. I had actually presented some predictive analysis to the management, and what basically I'm trying to say is, when we presented the data, and so they tried to use that data, and unfortunately, I think things didn't work out for them correctly, and
Okay.
they basically decided to neglect data henceforth. So we have it's unfortunately a challenge that not only the organization that I work for, but it's a Kenya-wide issue when it comes to use of data for decision making, especially primary decision making.
Right. So I think if I get you correctly, there was a level of trying to present some fancy prediction on the data that they had. Those predicted results weren't really trusted or valued, or they were presenting a different image, and you lost a lot of credibility in that approach. Is that a good summary of what you were saying?
That is correct.
Yeah, and So I would really recommend that you don't go to shoot the lights out in the beginning, and you've just got to get them to a point where they trust the data. So going for that level may be a step too far for them from a maturity point of view. You have to get there, but I would suggest you do that almost like a skunk work type of thing, where you've got data scientists that are in there and they start to explore and show value, show extra value. And they've got to have that checked with some of the SMEs before they take that in front of an exec. That can be quite dangerous. Harrison, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. I just wanted to add on what you exactly just said now. I think the approach might have been maybe to understand your audience first. You're talking to strategic levels, tactical level, or the operational level. In that way, you could also adjust your presentation, just for lack of a better word. But I think it's also the structure and the audience where you are taking your presentations to.
Right. Look, certainly what I would do in the first 90 days, my focus is to break down the resistance. Okay, break that down the resistance, and not to create more resistance, but just to get a point where people, the data is getting to them, they can understand what's happened. So just from just a pure BI level, they're now getting confidence in that data. So what I do find, when you put that data journey down, remember I put it down where they go data disabled, data enabled, data led. If you're going to jump from resistant to led very quickly, yes, there are times where they open that up and they can win, but there are a few times where you can lose and cause some problems. So what I do like to do my main focus is to get to a data enabled, so I can restore the trust. But I would also make use of a parallel in the meantime, as having data scientists looking for patterns within the data. And if they discover something that's insightful, fantastic, we can show the people, but be careful of trying to get too fancy in that beginning side. So okay, so someone's just, yes, Nikki?
Has the trust of data changed now that we have all these data scientists and data citizens and all of that with the executive level? Honestly.
So it was fascinating. We went to IT Web, and I think it was one of the top data scientists, the CDO of MultiChoice, and it was either him or Guy Taylor. I can't remember which one. And they did the question of getting people to stand up and say how many people have got data scientists working for them, and or data science, or they've got data science projects, and there must have been 80% of the audience that stood up. And then they said, okay, how many of these, how many of you have at least one data model in production, in production, and actually producing money for the business? And something like 80 to 85% of the people sat down that stood up. And then they said, well, how many of you people have got 5 models in production? And there was only one person remaining. So if I'm answering you and reading from the market, there are some that are doing fantastic work, but in general, the data scientists aren't delivering the value that the business are expecting and paying for at this point in time. Now, whether that's a challenge with the fact that their base data is not right, whether that has become a misguided missile in terms of just trying to find anything and trying to pop up and give it. But I don't think that it's translating that quickly, because we still have resistance to the data sitting at exec level and other heads. So if we don't overcome that resistance, we're going to battle to go to higher levels.
Howard, sorry, Harrison here again.
Yes.
Don't you think that's a problem with technical people trying to
Yes.
to understand business? Maybe
Yes.
I don't know, because we are taking all our technical staff and not really understanding the business model or the business drive and some of the levers within the business, just to talk the common language.
So the fascinating comment that I read from someone the other day, and Zane may be able to comment on this, was saying a true data scientist that can expose business value in data is very hard to find that sort of person. And they would suggest that you use internal SMEs and
Yes.
see if you can grow them into data scientists so they've got good gut feeling. They know what the data is saying. They know that there's value to the business. But just bringing a data scientist in from left field and say, show me the value.
Correct.
There's challenges there. Zane?
Yeah, no, so Howard, exactly that. I think the big challenge is, everybody sees data scientists as a hammer, and all of a sudden everything in your company starts looking like a nail.
Yeah.
And that's what the challenge is. And from what we've seen is if the data scientists are not embedded in the business and understand the business priorities as well as the actual data they're working with and the processes, it is close to impossible for them to add value. And to Nikki's question around the trust, I think, at least for the first 2 years, with the introduction of data scientists in our organization, it actually hindered the trust relationship.
Right.
Because they had no idea what they were doing, because they build all these models on the data, they start presenting something, and all of a sudden business becomes reluctant to say, but how can I trust this? But because the figures you're showing me doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Right. So so definitely a challenge. And I think, the understanding there sort of also, we need to articulate, as sort of the IT techie specialist type of people need to articulate to business what exactly is that they can expect from these individuals, as well as how we need to actually, we're not just putting down a data scientist. It's not going to solve all your problems. Unfortunately, there's business processes that sometimes also need to change more often than not, and they need to have business knowledge. Business knowledge is key. So developing it from in scratch, I think it's much easier taking a business person and teaching them how to build models than it is to take an actuary or somebody and teaching them what's going on in business.
I remember working with, I worked with some econometricians, and these guys have been working with statistics for such a long time. And then they brought in 5 data science interns from university. These guys, and it took these guys to get some level of answer. Almost, I think it was 6 weeks. It started being able to understand the data that they were working on, and these econometricians were pulling out the data within 2-3 days. And they just said, these guys have no understanding of what's going on. You're putting them into a dangerous position. Yes, they can look at the mathematical part of it, but that's where they are at the moment. So don't just think you're going to throw mathematics at a problem and you're going to come up with an answer. There's got to be some.
To answer, you've been talking about the experience thing. Can we not quantify that at all in all that you've been talking about today? So revenue, appropriate data usage, really look at the impact of what happened there in terms of data. Have you been asked to do any of that?
Yeah, so that's some of the discussions we're getting into now. And I'm assuming you're referring now to, there's 2 sides to the experience. One is the fact that, and maybe I'm misinterpreting you. So you're saying, let's talk about Experian. We talk about the data breach and the value that they're getting. Then this is where I may be getting you wrong. You're asking about the value that they're getting from the data that they're selling to their customers. Is that?
No, I'm talking about the reputational damage
Right.
that they're getting from what happened, from the breach of it, and
Yes.
the governance that was not around it.
Right.
And we all take that for granted. And we're talking about appropriate data asset usage. Now, the biggest appropriate data asset usage issue is when you get to the situation of Experian, because
You see, that's probably where I don't agree. My feeling is, and if I look at the importance here, the protection or the avoidance of risk is 10%. And I try to say that if my focus is compliance and POPI and stuff like that, what I start to do from a governance point of view is I start to close down the use of my assets. I start to reduce the use of the assets, where I think what I'm trying to say here is I want to increase the use of the assets in the right areas and for the right purpose. The right purpose is delivering value to the stakeholder, and getting them the information and getting the value chain to move faster and to give them the right data along the value chain so that value finally gets to the stakeholder. Of course, I couldn't agree more that we have to control and have to bear that in mind. But I think sometimes our people aren't even getting proper use of data. They're not getting data that helps, and they're not seeing it as an asset. So they're still seeing almost data as a liability or something that's just there to help them do the process and try to get to the end of the process faster. But they're really not seeing getting the insight from the data to support them and understand what's going on, or how they can improve. Does that answer your question?
no,
Nikki?
I understand what you're referring to. Yeah,
Okay.
I do.
Yeah. So I'm always, in governance people, we do that because the easiest way to sell to business is take the insurance sale. Well, you're going to listen to everybody. You've got these risks. So let's just get about bringing the security guys in and we control. But sometimes it's about the democratization of assets and giving people more access to information internally so that they can make better decisions and see the data as an asset. Of course, we have to protect and understand how it's used, but we almost want to be enablers rather than governors. So the governance thing steps in too big and too hard with their boots when everything's about compliance and risk.
Okay,
then,
so I'm going to throw something else. Then we only trust data that we buy. Because if you look at it, looking at that, so we all have and I'll actually use one of Zane's comments that he made in March. He has they have a department that has all the correct information, but then they go externally to find out the correct information because they don't trust their own data. Let's just
yeah.
So, do we only trust the information that we purchase? And that's why
I don't think so. But what we certainly find is, depending on where the business is in terms of its culture and maturity, if it's in a disabled state, then I can see them doing that, and then I can see what you're saying. If they're resistant to that, I can see the challenges that we face, and I think it's about trying to turn that around and trying to turn it away from let's just do the processes as quickly as possible to the value that's coming out of the data, and that people can improve the value to the stakeholders by seeing the data as an asset. The behavior of going somewhere else, I can see that happening because they just don't trust either the people or the data. But we have to go through these processes of let's just get better data usage and converting them to data enabled to see that we do have assets and we can have value. That's almost what I'm trying to suggest is the first big task that we have to convince the executives that this is the first issue that we need to address.
Thanks, Howard.
All right. So then once we've got the data flowing and data, the people seeing the value of the data, it's quickly going to come to a point of, shucks, but we've got a trust issue on the data. So then we have to start now addressing how do we uplift that trust. And so I was quite interested in terms of getting some feedback from you guys in terms of, if we now to convince the executives that they can trust the information, what would you focus on and what would you address as quickly as possible?
Hey, Howard. I'll jump in here. I'm
Yes.
thinking, convincing everyone that you've got one golden source of data into that is feeding into whatever everyone else is seeing across the business. I think that would create I don't know how long that might take. It might take more than 100 days, but I think but I think we're convincing everyone that we are using one golden source for every report or presentations or whatever output we are getting in the business. I think that could put everyone at ease. Yeah.
So Harrison, also the word I like to use is representative. So you could be sitting with business and say, let's talk about the different systems we have, and if you were to get data to answer or this value chain or part of this value chain, where should the authoritative source be, or where's the representative source? And so the golden source becomes a little bit tricky to explain, but what you can be asking the execs or people like that is to say, if you're going to get data from somewhere for this part of the value chain, where is that place? And then you'd focus on making sure that that's where the reports are getting the data from. If you're going to be looking at any data, you want it to be coming from there. And then I would go to the next level of having data quality indicators within the reports to show them that there are some potential challenges with that data, but this is what we've got from that source.
100%. Yeah. I mean,
So what I've found is a tremendous uplift for people is that when you start bringing in an assessment, a quality assessment of the information that they're looking at, and doing the profiling that, but as you're presenting it, if you're constantly saying, well, this is what was presented, but I had a certain level of accuracy or whatever that may be, at the same time, you're not trying to present that this report has got no challenges with it and the data has no challenges. You got to try to highlight some of the potential pitfalls that they face when looking at a report. I don't know if any of you have done that. Have you started to present reports with quality indicators on them? And if it's a simple thing of red, green, and yellow, if it's red, you can say, well, we have a problem trusting that information for this reason. If they click on it, they're saying, well, it doesn't balance back to the source, or we've got challenges with completeness. And if you can just start having that level of communication, it's amazing how the interaction with the report improves. Has anyone done that?
I did some of that at my previous company, Howard.
And how did it go?
Yeah, it didn't go down well.
Okay.
But the same conversation almost when I presented around data maturity of the company, that conversation also didn't go down well.
Oh.
And execs typically don't want to hear that the data is shitty, and we can't really make decisions based on historical data, and it could be about data completeness, the quality, just total inconsistencies. especially in the early few years of a company, and I'm talking about a company that's 10 years or younger. Initially, when companies get set up, they don't necessarily have mature systems or anything like that, and a lot of work gets done on Excel spreadsheets and stuff. So if you're trying to create some trend analysis and stuff, you almost have to discount the first 3 years or so of the company's information data, and people don't necessarily want to hear that.
So I like what you're bringing up, and there were 2 points to this. I also put this up. Typically, when you start with the execs, you don't really want to be talking about maturity. But what you want to be able to say to them in those first 90 days are, this is your level of trust that people have with the data. Okay? So before you just start throwing quality numbers onto a dashboard, you want to be doing the profile as someone suggested, and then say, guys, do you acknowledge or do you see the challenges you have with your data? Do you see the state of your data? Now, how do we go about helping you address that? And I find there's 2 ways of doing it. One is to focus on saying, I have to uplift my maturity. There's things that I have to do with my data assets. The warning is there that this takes a lot of time. This doesn't go away, and it doesn't happen tomorrow or within the 90 days. But we have to now start bringing in an assessment of when that report comes to you, that you are then highlighting to them that I've got a red next to this number, and because of this and this reason. So what you're trying to do is create that transparency to say, I'm not just presenting these numbers to you as if it was gospel. I'm trying to present the numbers with our understanding of the level of quality that element has. They can certainly go and vet it with their source system and say, shucks, the source system is saying, and of course you have to get that accuracy right. But what you're trying to do is, first of all, you've highlighted that there is a trust problem. Now I need to start addressing the trust problem. What are the techniques we can use to address trust? Maturity is one thing. But if you probably tell them that and you put a graph like this in front of them, they say, well, I'm not sure whether it's worth it. So you need to focus on start showing some of the things on the report itself. And the way I've done it and started to get that change happening is by putting the quality on the report.
Hi, Howard. It's Anthony here.
Yes, Anthony.
Hi. Sorry, I'm a newbie here, so
No problem.
I'm really enjoying
it.
I think from my experience, I've run the gambit. I've gone everywhere, all the way from an executive who says, "Don't care, give me the report," all the way to an executive who goes, "Wow, that's really interesting. Let's see how we can do something about it." I think what we've done that's been semi-successful, I wouldn't classify it as fully successful, is that before we even get to the report, we go through an exercise of describing the data. And that's generally what we do with the stakeholder. And that just gives them a sense of what we're going to be working with. And some of the time, it's actually stopped at that stage. We don't even get to report construction simply because the data is not in a good enough state. And the best case scenario out of that is where an engagement happens with the data owners to go, what can we do to improve the state of this data such that we can use it for decision making down the line. So those are just some of the experiences that we've gone through.
Yeah, so you're certainly getting to a scenario where you're starting to work with or assign owners to domains of data, and then try to help them. Well, they got to get involved with the assessment of it and then fixing of it. Unfortunately, that takes a long time, and so we're talking about. And I'm not saying we don't do it. We certainly have to do this. You have to start allocating responsibility for somebody who's going to stick their hand up and agree with you that there is a challenge, and start taking on that KPI to fix it. But it's going to take some time, especially if it's applications that they don't have control on. We're going to take some time to get that right.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is the challenge that I find with when you start trying to introduce a new way of working, the politics, the control, the behavior. You've got to start showing some value relatively quickly. Taking them on a maturity journey is not going to open the wallet. Showing them that they have a problem is certainly going to say, shucks, I get it. I understand where our data is. And now let's just be aware of what we are. But we can't close down reports. I mean, an example that we had with one BI project, we had this option of a balance sheet. And when I first saw the balance sheet coming through in the data warehouse, it wasn't balancing to zero. And the accountant was freaking out, just saying, this just did not compute with the accountant. And we said, okay, well, there's a different way of doing it. Where we can't map some of the rows to the appropriate categories in the on the balance sheet, what we're going to do is we're going to define a data quality error category. And then it came through as a balance of zero. But then they had this area that they had to look at is to say, well, here are all the unmapped transactions, and there was money sitting in there. And then all of a sudden they calm down and say, okay, we understand the problem. As long as it balances to zero, we just understand we got a mapping issue and we got to take care of that. So that was a technique that I used to show quality challenges, but I could never violate the. And then I gave them the option, guys, I can stop loading this balance sheet and not show it to you if I don't find a balance. Or I can map it to an error state and then you can help me fix it.
Yeah, it sounds quite familiar. That's why I was laughing at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it depends on the people, right? So for example, if you talk to accountants and your balance sheet doesn't balance to zero, there's a cardinal sin. They're just not going to feel comfortable with their data. It doesn't matter what you do.
They already know the answers to that. So
yeah. But what I do find a lot is a lot of the times the source system does balance to zero. That accounting package, it's balancing to zero, and then when you move it into reports, that's when the funnies come along, and that's when they just lose trust of you as the data expert.
That's correct.
and you did as much as you like, but you lost it at the last hurdle. All right, guys, I need to move on to another meeting. I apologize. Thanks for all the interaction. Andrea, I'm not sure whether I answered your question or whether you're still in that quandary of I don't know what to do and how to change this trust level.
No, I'm good, Howard. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I hope it's going better with the new batch.
Oh, yeah, we need coffee with a shot of something in that coffee for that conversation.
Yeah, there's a thing called divorce care.
Yeah.
Data management divorce care. Yeah.
Yeah. Book another course. When is the next?
Fantastic, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, guys.